designed to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this is Calibrate Real Estate. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and joining me today from downtown Chicago is a good buddy of mine, Matt Laricy. Matt Laricy is a third-generation realtor. He heads his team. He's the managing partner for Americorp in downtown Chicago. Matt, say hi to our podcast audience.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for having me on too, Kyle. Really appreciate it, man.
Hey, we are good buddies. We have met each other in person multiple times. Usually when I'm in Chicago, Matt had mentioned that he doesn't make it out of Chicago very often, except for a couple of vacations a year. He's a grinder. He's a hard worker. He's a salt of the earth guy, although he does look like a cover boy, cover model, if you're seeing this on YouTube. But let's get right into our first question, Matt. So I would say that generational real estate agents, generational real estate industry influencers, that's a big thing in our industry. I've found that a lot of people learn from their dad or their mom. A lot of people learn from an uncle or a cousin. In this case, you've now gone third generation. So let's talk about a little bit of what the evolution of the company that you're a managing partner with has been like, and what's it like working and be in that third generation of being, having to prove yourself, having to make sure that this isn't nepotism. And I'm sure that there are those questions that happen, like, does he deserve to be the managing partner? Or is it just because, his grandfather and then his dad and then him? And how do you feel about that being the third generation? And what does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, it's just a different way of doing business. Like, my grandpa was just kind of more of a part-time agent. He would buy houses and try to flip them and things like that. I mean, he was a blue-collar trades guy, so Southside Irish guy. So, he actually used to work for Mayor Daley back in the day, the original Mayor Daley, being a bricklayer for him and stuff. So, he got his license more or less just for buying certain properties. He wasn't really a hardcore, this is his only job. It was more or less, like a lot of people, kind of more like a side job. I think that inspired my father to become an agent. He got started in a different career in finance and realized that you can make more money in real estate. And, knowing our roots of being kind of connected to housing, he got involved with it on the south side of Chicago, which is kind of known to be more of a working class city. And he was very successful down there, one of the top agents on the south side. But, being very successful on the south side is being nothing in comparison in the state of, Illinois, and specifically in the city of Chicago, because, the bigger sales are always in the city. So you could do, he used to do 300 transactions a year on the south side, which would equal to maybe 20 transactions downtown, So when I got involved with the industry, and I think it's kind of like you said, is that you get inspired by your parents and you want to, emulate them and just kind of try to look up to them. And my whole life was always revolved around, or vacations were planned around when the market was slower. Back in the day with the phone books, and, I used to handwrite the MLS books, for my dad. So, because back in the day, they didn't have the computer. So, I just grew up around it and hearing them talk on the phone over and over again every single day of the week. And since I was 3 years old, I just said I was always going to get into real estate. So when I finally got into it, like a lot of people, I just thought it was going to be one of these industries where you just automatically make money and people just be calling you and you'd be like, I got my license. Everybody knew my dad was in the business, that I would just take over his book of business on the south side and I wouldn't really have to do much. And this was 06, 07. And at that time, the market was starting to really shift. You could tell there was going to be a bubble soon. And the south side got hammered. And it just wasn't what I wanted to do with my life, is sell over there. It's kind of a rough neighborhood. Certain areas are, it's like you see in the news, I can't really comment on safety, but, you could see what they produce. And in 08, when it was absolutely rock bottom, I said to myself that if I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it big. And the only way I'm really going to make it big is by doing it downtown. And that's where the action is. And, I didn't have any knowledge of downtown at all. There's all these different neighborhoods in downtown, like River North and Cherryville, Gold Coast, Lincoln Park. Some of these things people may have heard of. I've heard of some of them. I actually didn't even hear of all of them, but I knew they existed. And I knew that to be really successful, I had to memorize all those areas and learn from all that. And I thought, if I'm going to expand the company downtown, I'm going to do it like a college education, because there's no college education for real estate that I know of. So I thought to myself that, hey, I'm going to go downtown and maybe I'll be broke for the next 4 years, but I'm going to teach myself the city and the buildings. And that's kind of how I catapulted, bringing my father's company, which is Americorp, down to the downtown market, which at the time had about 18,000 active agents. So.
And downtown Chicago, for those who haven't been, I mean, I'm sure there's people listening that haven't been to Chicago. Downtown Chicago is a very, very different world than south of the city. And it's also a very different world than the northern suburbs. You've got, I mean, Chicago is a gigantic real estate market. I would probably rival it to the LA market, and I'd probably rival it to the DC, Maryland, Virginia market, where you have some of the top-notch, upper crust, upper echelon agents doing work in the city. And there's a reason why people are Cubs fans or White Sox fans, because they literally, I mean, you have that dividing line. Are you a North Sider or are you a South Sider? And that's a big deal. I've got a coworker here that grew up in Barrington. I've got family that lives on the north side. My wife's family's all from the very, very northern suburbs, almost to Wisconsin. And I would tell you that that's a big move for you, basically leaving the safety of where your family's business started and going out into uncharted waters. And it basically, there's a couple of books about this. One of them is called Blue Ocean, and it's all about like you're going out of that, you know, friendly little harbor, and you're going out into the big blue sea with a bunch of sharks and a bunch of people that are out there. And so what was that like? What were those first 4 years like as you're learning the business in Chicago?
You have to remember that the Southsiders and Northsiders hate each other. You know, and it's true. They really do. Like my old man hates Northsiders, hates. Still to this day, one, he's never seen our office downtown. So he's never seen our office downtown. We've been down here for over 10 years. He won't come down because he hates everybody down here. And anytime there's ever a problem with anything, because a lot of the books are still, all our books are still done by him and all the money runs to the South Side, he says it's because of a Northsider problem. You know, it's always their fault. It has nothing to do with the individual. It has to do because they're from the North Side. So the hatred is very real. And for him, when I did decide to take the company downtown, it was a big problem because he was really against me selling down here. And then he didn't want to support it at all. So, you know, at that time I was about 23 years old when I took the company downtown, and it's 2008, which is the worst housing economy of all time. You know, I didn't have any money. My dad wouldn't give me any money. And I was still doing some odd jobs for him, like picking up lock boxes and all this other stuff, but he wouldn't give me any money for gas either. So you have to remember, like you drive around, you got to fill up a tank of gas too. So, I mean, these were like probably the worst years of my life, I would say, but also years that I wouldn't trade in, because I really got to understand the value of a dollar and got to understand like what hard work was like. Because, you know, when you're trying to start a company in the absolute worst economy this American, you know, has ever seen, especially the worst housing economy you've ever seen, and you have all that competition and you have no knowledge, you know, I would say that, you know, I cried myself to sleep numerous nights because, you know, your friends are out there making six figures, you know, everybody's out of college. You know, at that point, you know, friends are between 23 and 26 doing well, meeting girls, doing that stuff. And, you know, I'm living at home at my parents' house without a dollar in my pocket saying, hey, I want to make a name for myself in this real estate game. And 8, 9, 10, let's remember, like everybody said that, like, you're an idiot if you buy real estate or you're involved with real estate anyway. And they, you know, all they're talking about is we're getting ran by China in a couple of years. So, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of sleepless nights. I mean, I would say that almost nightly I wanted to quit. I'll never forget in 2009, I took a clipboard, because what I used to take was this clipboard that I would write down the addresses for, because I didn't know the city at all downtown Chicago. So I would go into every building. I'd walk into these high rises and I would say, is this a rental or a sale or a condo? And if they said it was a rental, I'd leave, because I said, if I'm going to make money, I'm not going to make money off rentals. I'm going to make money off condos. But if it was a condo, I'd grill the doorman and try to get all the information I could about the buildings. And I'd put it on my map, because I had a hard copy map that I had on my clipboard. At that time, I just had the map. My mom gave me a clipboard. She's like, you need this when you walk around, because this time, again, remember, iPads and all that stuff's not out. So I had old map with a clipboard, walking in the buildings, you know, randomly. And every night almost I'd throw that clipboard out like I wanted to quit. And every day I'd get up, my mom had that clipboard still sitting on the table, saying that, like, with some sort of note, like, you know, you know, when it hits, you know, like, meaning that, like, you just got to keep at it. So, you know, there's a lot of nights like that, but just like anything else, you gotta keep going at it, no matter how many times it sucks and how many times you think you'll never make it. I think the people who put their head down and just work are the ones that always make it.
Man, I'm a father. I have 3 kids. I've obviously got a dad, got a mom. My wife is the tender-hearted mother There's an old phrase that, you know, the children need to have the love of their mother and the fear of their father. And I can just see that where your dad's like, look, you're going to make it in this business. I'm not giving you anything. You're going to make it on your own. And
Right.
further, I'm going to make it harder probably because I don't want to have this situation where anyone could perceive nepotism. And it's like the school of hard knocks. And your mom's like lovingly like, keep going at it, keep going at it, keep going. Love it. So at what point did you know that you were going to survive? At what, do you remember a moment? Do you remember a deal where you're like, I think this is going to work?
I had a tipping point in my career in 2010. It was the day my mom died, when we got a random phone call. We were sitting in a hotel room and we found out that we were at a wedding. It was midnight. My mom and dad decided to leave because the AC broke, so they gave us their hotel room. And I got a call that my mom passed away, which just came out of nowhere. She just went to bed and didn't wake up. It was something crazy. And when I was driving back to the house and we were rounding the corner and I saw my house, I saw a line of cop cars. And I always remember that, like, at that moment, like, time stopped for me. I could still remember like it was yesterday. Like, my whole life, it was like a machine finally like removing a kink, and all of a sudden everything started operating correctly. Like, everything just kind of fell into place. Like, it made sense to me. Like, I felt that I had to stand up to the plate and kind of be the one that's going to have to run the family at that point, because I knew my father would be beat up, and my brother, who's older, as much as I love him, I know he's too weak to lead. And I knew that at this point, it wasn't whether or not I was ready to take control. It was like something I had to do. And from then on, the next day, I got my biggest deal of my career. Literally happened while we were, preparing funeral arrangements. And I just kept remembering the saying. My mom used to say that when it hits, it hits. And I felt like I know it sounds crazy to think real estate when you're talking in a morbid situation, but we were a real estate family. And the fact that then another big sale happened right after that, like 2 days after that my biggest sales in my career just so happened out of nowhere. I've never did a $500,000 sale in my entire career. I did 2 of them in a row out of nowhere. They literally came out of left field. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is the time to take control and take the reins. And I'm never looking back, and I'm never going to feel sorry for myself again. I'm never going to, say that I can't do it. And from then on, I wouldn't let the word can't get into my brain. I can only go for can. And I never looked back from there. And from that moment on, that was the first year I did, I think I did $5.4 million in sales that year. And ever since that year in 2010, I've doubled my production every single year. So I went from 5 to 10 to 18 to 39 to 66 to 105 to 129 to 140 something, then 162. And then this year we're going to do 200. So, it's just been, ever since then, I can literally say it was literally that moment, that looking back on it, that I said I would never, ever, ever let defeat, reside in my body again.
I never knew that story. For our audience, Matt and I know each other, and we've met, and we're colleagues because we both got this accolade called the 30 under 30. And what I can tell you is that the reason I got the honor in 2011 is that my brother died in a very similar fashion, unexpected, basically passed away in his sleep. And he had some heart complications that he was born with. But as you're sharing that with me, my friend, that brought back so many just raw memories. Yeah. And it was the absolute tipping point in my career as well. And it was amazing. And I'm a person of faith. God was moving in my life in so many different ways. And it's such a bittersweet tragedy when you realize like what you're supposed to be doing because of a loss. But I think that sometimes we have to be brought down completely, just condensed down to our core before we can then progress forward. And I would imagine you did a lot of what you did in memory of your mom. And obviously, like you said, a real estate family, like you were doing it for your dad, for your brother, like it became your mission. And that is incredible.
Well, still to this day, people are always trying to buy us out, or, when you do as much volume and stuff as we do, and we're the only boutique company downtown that's doing these type of numbers. One of the only boutique companies across the country now with all these big companies doing these type of numbers. I always say that, my mom and dad always supported the business, and that there's no reason that we're ever going to turn back on that. If anything, we'll buy them. We won't be bought. And I do it just because I know that that's the way she would have wanted it done,
Man, I love your just kind of raw intensity and competitiveness. I think that's awesome. Okay. So 2010, that moment. All right. Now we're almost 10 years after that moment. What's life like today? How is your business set up differently today than it was 10 years ago when you started really kind of getting through '09 and 2010? And then obviously in this past decade, in 2013, you're recognized by Realtor Magazine. You're 30 under 30, which is something that I experienced the year before. And what a national honor, which I think in some ways, whether you were looking for this or not, validates all the work you've been doing.
Right.
And at a young age, you now become connected to all of these people nationwide that are doing things all over the country and frankly into Canada. And just what was that experience like getting the 30 under 30 honor, but then also what's business like now? How do you have things set up differently and how have you evolved that business without your mom now?
Well, I mean, 30 under 30 to me was huge at the time. I applied in 10, 11, 12, and 13. Okay. So I was, younger when I was doing it, but I wanted it so badly that I would do anything for it. In fact, I remember when we would apply, my wife, who I would say is at the time, she was just my girlfriend, is definitely the brains of my life. She's a very intelligent woman, and me and her would sit down and literally spend months doing the application process of what can we change and how can we make this better and perfect it. And I wouldn't say that grammar is my strong suit. I have a little bit more of a raw personality, so she would have to take what I said and make it sound actually like semi-intelligent. But, when I finally did get it, because, the year that you won it, like you said, I was only a finalist. And when I didn't get it, the time when I made it top 50 out of the 30, I would say it was devastating. I don't think I slept probably for about a month. I wasn't frustrated with the system. I was frustrated with myself. I'm the type of guy that have always walked around my whole life with a chip on my shoulder, just always. And I literally use that as motivation and another tool in my arsenal to say that, like, if you think I can't do it, like, there's another thing coming. Like, if there's nothing that's going to make me not get this. And I've always been that way my whole life. That, not to sound like a douche when I say it, that like I get what I want, but it's when I see something I want, I focus on it and I obsess over it. And I dissect what it would take to get that. And then I do everything in my power to make it happen. And 30 under 30 was one of those things that on my notch, my belt, that, like I said, like something I always wanted to accomplish in my life. That was one of them for a career. So when I finally did get it, I would say it was like, to be honest with you, it was very satisfying in the sense that, like, when you work so hard for something and then you finally get it, it's something that kind of makes you feel proud for a minute. But I'm also the type that I'm never satisfied. So when I did get it, I was also kind of like, maybe I should have gotten it sooner. And I have to work harder now because there's other awards out there I have to get to.
It's interesting. I felt for you and for the other 19 that were in the top 50, but didn't become 30 under 30. And the year that I was recognized was the year that you were in the top 50, and it was my final year. And so there's part of me that was like, thank goodness I snuck in.
Right.
Because the year before I wasn't even close. I mean, it wasn't even, there wasn't even like any shred of a doubt that I would even be in the top 50. So when I made it as a finalist, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, here we go. And then to hear someone like yourself, obviously that had applied year after year after year. I only applied 2 years. There are some people that are in our group that applied 5 and 6 years before they got it. And I think there's a part of it that creates some humility for sure, because a lot of us are top producers. Yeah. But then there's also that part, like you said, to me as we were prepping, but that we both know from knowing people that are part of Realtor Magazine and part of NAR, is that this is not a production award, which is the coolest thing about it. Production certainly plays a part, but it is all about your story. And what do you think was the difference between, I mean, obviously the perseverance, I'm sure that's part of it, but what do you think was the difference between 2012 and 2013? Do you think that there was anything, have you ever heard after the fact, like anything that tipped you over?
Honestly, I haven't. And I mean, I doubled my production value from 12 to 13 as well. So I know that production isn't a ton of it, but maybe it was the fact that, they probably saw me for a 4th or 5th year. I can't remember how many years I applied, but we're like, I would think, because I do think that, like, the story, emotional aspect of it, that, like, we definitely have, but I do think that there's got to be something at play that whoever was deciding on this, that they're like, this is a 4th or 5th year. And looking back on it, you could see that one, I keep getting my involvement with the industry overall was, being going up each and every year, trying to help NAR out and, our local industries and stuff. My involvement with charities kept going up as well. and our production kept going up. And I have to think that like with the story we have, which I think remained pretty consistent, to be frank, I think the other stuff as I matured that people may have said like, hey, this guy is a rising star and we need to acknowledge that.
All right. So you mentioned obviously third generation realtor. You had started in your early 20s, now into your 30s. A lot of the people that I interview, I ask them this question. It's the idea of dear younger me. And it's the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. You had mentioned your mom gave you some advice and your mom would continue to help you out with it. But as you're maybe a mentor now and you're giving advice to someone in their early 20s, what do you think people need to know? What's that advice someone that's struggling, that's really hustling, that feels like they're never going to get their shot or they're grinding away? What are the things that you tell someone in their young 20s to be successful in this real estate industry?
Well, first off, I would say too that the fact that I don't think I would, well, I know for a fact I wouldn't change anything in my own, career. And that has to do with, because the reality is that all the failures that I did, all the times I felt embarrassed, all the times that, I messed up on stuff, it only made me who I am today. And I think if I would have known what I know today, I don't think I would be anywhere near I am, like where I'm at today because of it. So like, and I know that sounds terrible to say that I wouldn't change anything, but I really wouldn't. When it comes to what advice I would give other people, I would say that Rome wasn't built overnight. That's the biggest thing I tell people all the time, is that Rome's not built overnight, because at the end of the day, this is the type of business where you can make a lot of money, and a lot of people feel like you're going to make a lot of money right away. But it always comes down to how hard you're going to work at it, right? You get what you put into this business, and that's how it works. And too many people think when they first start off that, hey, I'm going to become a real estate agent, I'm going to make a ton of money. And then when it doesn't happen day one, they give up on it, right? I mean, I would say 90% of people I know that get their real estate license end up either just keeping it and never doing anything with it, or they just end up not being a real estate agent anymore, Now, I don't know how true of a stat that is nationwide. I'm just saying my own mind from people I know that get it. That's kind of what happens. And I think, it's the instant gratification society that we live in today, that when you don't get exactly what you want right away, you just kind of give up because it's easier to kind of give up. But this is the type of industry that, yeah, you can make a lot of money at it, but you have to work really, really hard for it. And you have to understand that you're not going to make any money up front. I would say the first 4 years, so I tell everybody that works for me, the first 4 years, you're not going to make anything. If you do make any money, think of it like as cherry on top of the sundae. But minus that, for 4 years, you're not going to make shit. And I always say my very first year in the business, my very first year, I made $17,000 and I did a couple sales and rentals. Okay. After that, my second year in the business, I only made $18,000. Pretty much my first 4 years in the business total, I made less than $50,000 combined. And I can't remember what it is, but I think I did 8 transactions in my first 4 years. I mean, we do about, right now at this time of year, I'll do 8 transactions in 2 days right now. So I think about 4 years, I did 8 total, in 2 or 3 days, I do 8 just regular. And that's just kind of what we do. And people are like, well, how do you go from there to this? And it's just hard work. It's experience. It's knowing the difference in the market, knowing that you have to keep doing it. But if you think you're going to get into this business and just make it on day one, it's probably the worst mentality to have. And I do think, kind of catapulting off that, not to rattle on it, but a lot of people who've gotten into business the last couple of years have been on easy street because the market's been a little bit easier. They don't know what it's like to kind of get punched in the mouth, like Gary Vee always says, right? They don't remember what the bad economy is. And now that we're in what we call a shifting market and things aren't selling as quick, these people are like, oh my God, the market's terrible. We're in this buyer's market, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, we're heading back towards normal water. And you know what has to happen? And they're like, what? I'm like, you got to work again. All your friends just aren't randomly buying. You don't have to do any work, and you could write an offer without them even seeing it or you seeing it because they went to an open house, And I think that's the big difference. And people out there who want to work and that are going to kind of persevere and not give up and not shy away from it, they're going to be the ones to succeed. And it's probably the same thing in your market. The top guys are the guys that work the most. The guys that are at the bottom are the guys that you don't see around that much, doing much, and they aren't doing the following up or having good systems.
You're so right. I think that you're actually in many ways harmed or hampered if you have immediate success. I had a very similar experience to you. Instead of working in sales right away, though, I worked in the administrative side, and part of it was by necessity. I needed a salary. Yeah. That was that experience, that deal volume without getting the reward trained me for what I needed to do when I was going to be on the commission side of things. And I completely agree. I love that you brought up Gary Vee also. Yeah. Gary Vaynerchuk, for a lot of people who don't know who Gary Vee is, Definitely not a preschooler's motivational speaker. I got a real foul mouth, but Gary Vee has written a ton of different books, and over the past 10 years has become very, very popular. But that idea of getting punched in the mouth, I actually want to go old school. Everything that you had just shared in the last couple of minutes reminds me of a famous Teddy Roosevelt quote, Teddy Roosevelt poem. And a lot of people know Teddy Roosevelt as a former president over 100 years ago of the United States. But what a lot of people don't know is how tough of a guy Teddy Roosevelt was. He was a boxer. He became famous for exploring the Western US with the Rough Riders. I mean, just doing all this different stuff. And there's this very famous quote called the man in the arena. And if you'll bear with me for a second, I'm going to read it to you because as you were saying, I'm like, I've got to just share this with our audience. It's called The Man in the Arena. And I quote Teddy Roosevelt by saying, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who never know victory nor defeat." And yeah. I love that last part because it's very easy to be the critic, but never step in, because those are the cold, timid souls that just never tried and will sit there and be like, oh, you know what, you're doing it wrong. You should do it this way. You should do it that way. But it's get out there, get your nose bloody, make stuff happen. Be that Chicago tough guy, and I love it. All right, so before we end, we're just at the end of our show. Let's talk about your podcast. I want to hear about the Matt Laricy podcast and what you're doing, who you're talking to, where people can subscribe, where they can learn about you, and where they can follow you.
Yeah, we have two pretty cool things. We have the Matt Laricy Project podcast, which is it's recorded on video and in audio, and pretty much we bring in influential entrepreneurs around the city of Chicago and out of the city. You know, we get celebrities, athletes, people that are on TV and stuff like that come onto the show. And we really just kind of get to know about like how do they get to successful and what are some practices that got them there. And for people who are trying to make it big, no matter what industry, we're trying to bring value to the listeners out there, because I think any entrepreneur can take away certain points from somebody and relate to it. And that's what we try to bring out in people. So if you're trying to start a business, no matter what it is, we have something for you, whether it be, we have celebrity chefs on there that talk about like how they made a big restaurant, or, HGTV stars and things like that nature. We also have, on more of a personal side, our vlog that kind of gives you a little bit of a background on who we are, what we got going on behind the scenes, and kind of like how day-to-day operations work.
Awesome. So we've got the Matt Laricy Project podcast. And is that on Apple Podcasts, on Google
on Apple, Spotify? You can also subscribe to it on YouTube as well.
Nice. I love it. Well, Matt, I'm going to start following that because I didn't know that until we got back together again here over at least our Facebook group. And I look forward to seeing you in Chicago. I'm going to be there in a couple of months to say hi and to do some planning. Yeah. And as I love to say for our podcast guest, Matt Laricy, I'm Kyle Malnati. And for our podcast producer, Kayla Davis, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kyle.